Hello, everyone. Welcome back. A little bit of a false start there, but everything's fine. Everything's okay. We're going to carry on. So, normally on this Sunday, I actually do a members live Q&A where I just take members' questions, and there is some server maintenance going on right now. So, we can't do it on our site. So, we are here and we're going to do it on YouTube and Rumble and Facebook. And so I will be taking your questions from the chat, but we're also going to be mixing in a lot of the member questions. And just so members know, these questions are very important to me. And so if I don't get at least 30 or 40 done today, I will be making a separate video for the members where I include more questions so we can get through the bulk of your weekly questions today. All right, so let's dive in. And I cannot believe, by the way, that we are already at the end of 2023 and, kind of embarking on this crazy 2024. So I'm sure we're going to get into that today. So for those of you who don't know also, if I'm reading a question from a member, I don't say their name, so it'll just say member. And anyone who is watching live on YouTube or Rumble, your username will be said. Okay. So this question is from a member, and it says, "Hi Gigi, I'm curious your thoughts on when or how organized religion, specifically the Catholic Church, hijacked the Christ teachings, and how satanic is the Vatican. There seems to be quite a bit of symbolism going on there. Also, do you have any idea which came first, the Catholic Mass or the Black Mass?" Okay, so something that's very important to understand about religions is that religions form around a spiritual impulse, or if you want to look at it in a personified way, around what would be considered a spiritual master, usually. And so in Buddha, you have a spiritual human master in Buddhism and Buddha, the same thing with Hinduism. And so usually you have this great, powerful spiritual master or very high initiate that brings forward either a massive initiatory rite for humanity, as in the case of Jesus Christ, and also the Buddha to an extent. And they also bring forward teachings, and then a religion will form around them. And even above them, a very specific impulse for the epoch that needs to be brought forward that brings human development to an even higher pinnacle. So every religion is going to become dogmatic at some point, because human beings, it's not possible for us to understand and really grasp the entirety of God. And so we can really only relate to God in regards to our own level of development or what we're developing at the time, which means that, any given religion is going to have certain information on certain things. And it's also going to leave a lot of things out that have to do with metaphysics and spirituality and just spiritual law, because the human being cannot contain all that is to know. We can only carry what's relevant to us at this point in our development. So this means that over time, while every religion has very important keys and truths in it, it can become dogmatic and it can become a dead stream eventually. And that's something that we all have to understand and look out for. And another thing that happens is the moment that there's an initiatory impulse that's brought forward through a master and into a religion and into a spiritual impulse that eventually turns into a worshipfulness and religion. And that's just really people trying to connect with the initiating impulse of the era. That's really what that is. A religion is supposed to be. The moment that comes to pass, the moment that something beautiful is done upon the earth, like in the case of Christ, there are dark forces that immediately not only try to prevent it from happening, but immediately work to distort it and take it over and stop it. So the moment that, the church was formed as we know it, there were immediately people trying to infiltrate it. Okay, that's the reality. And over time, obviously that begins to, in some ways, become successful. I did a video a few years ago about an absolutely bizarre Vatican nativity scene where, it's supposed to be a normal nativity scene in front of, in Rome, in the Vatican. And they made the most bizarre and monstrous and creepy, scene with like an astronaut holding the moon. And there's like this weird, bizarre guy with no arms and like a helmet on. And you can't see baby Jesus in his crib. He's got like some like red shroud. I mean, it's like bizarre, weird stuff. And so even if you're like a Catholic, I think you have to recognize that there are aspects of the Vatican and the Pope that are no longer really representing Christ. I mean, it doesn't mean that you can't have your tradition. That's fine. But I think, the only way that we're going to get the best out, really, of any religion, and certainly Catholicism and Christianity is by far not the only religion that has become corrupted. Every single religion has, of course, because human beings are like that. We have to admit that there's room for improvement, right? I mean, just look at the Jesuits, right? And so the moment that something good is created in the world, there's immediately dark forces that come to stop that and to prevent that from getting traction. And so that definitely includes trying to blasphemize the Christ impulse and Christ's teachings and Christ's deed. And what Satanism does, and this is actually what makes it Satanism, what makes it demonic, is they'll take something that is pure, right? They'll take something that is good and they'll just invert it. So the key thing to remember with Satanism and with black magic is nothing new is ever created, okay? Black magicians are a desperate and weird folk. They're not creating new things. They're not geniuses. They're pathetic. And so what that means is that they have to take things that are already created and try to invert them. They have to try to hijack them, take them over, and distort them to the point, rename them and invert them. And then they hope to siphon energy off of that because it's a little bit changed, a little bit different, that makes it go towards them. So the moment it was created, there was automatically kind of a subversion that was going on there. And so also a lot of the very high, dark magical practices really relate back to Babylon. And you could really see it as Babylonian magic, which was a very specific time in human development where, what we know as paganism had kind of reached its peak. And humanity sort of knew the magical purpose of every single plant, every single elemental, and the entire external world had become sort of magically known or esoterically kind of understood and categorized. And so you could sort of start doing magic like a recipe. And that was only really in our epoch, like that was what Babylon was really about. And then when Christ incarnates, everything happens from within. There is no more need to try to play God and do these kind of things like in the pagan era of humanity, which they were trying to do. And so a lot of what goes on is not anything to do with Christ. It literally is just Babylonian magic that is a very old form of basically paganism that is inverted. And it's not even, the bizarre thing is, it's not even like the paganism of like 5,000 years ago, right? Because that kind of paganism would never have done this sort of stuff. They had an incredible, genuine respect for harmony in nature, and they wouldn't try to control it. So this is even not how genuine paganism was. This is something that's completely different and inverted and dark. And so that's what happens. And it happened also in Hinduism. It's happened in Buddhism. There are dark sides to every single religion. There's a dogmatic aspect to every single religion. But in the West, we're obviously very drawn to the the Christian issue because we're a Western nation. Okay. Okay. How's the sound? How's the stream? Is it going all right? Okay. Okay. This is from another member. As a mystic, how does one know when it is the right time to put new information out into the world, especially knowing that the information will not go over well with people? Wow, what a great question. I think if you are on a spiritual path and you're a mystic and you're wanting to teach and you're wanting to put your vision and your work out there, you have to know that just being a mystic, you're required to operate separate from the world. So in this way, nothing that you put out into the world is for your worship or for you to be accepted or for you to gain anything. When you take the mystic path, the spiritual path, the path even of the monk or the whatever you want to say, when you take that path, and that's what being a spiritual teacher is, you cannot prioritize what other people think or where the world is, because what you do, you don't do to serve yourself or to be accepted. And so whatever you get, you get. And the secret is to really understand your own sensitivities and your own processes to the point that you trust yourself. And if you do that enough and you teach enough over a long period of time, you'll usually start to see that everything that you put out there is maybe a year ahead, a few years ahead, a couple months ahead, a couple days ahead. And the reason why the information feels so weird is because you're doing what you're supposed to be doing as a mystic, which is going beyond time and sharing with humanity patterns that you feel are coming in order to prepare for them. And so that is the joy and the burden of the mystic. There's always, now this just gets into the mystics, I think, bedside manner, which is that you can make it so your sense of love for humanity and for the world is so great within yourself, which is the first thing that I usually teach my students to do, is to be able to feel holy emotions and build them within yourself, to the point that you can really share anything. You can find a way, if you are coming from a good, authentic, loving place, to share even the most difficult information, right? A lot of that is about where you're coming from. If you're going to share a bunch of dark and creepy and gross stuff, and clearly you're a sick person and like you like it and you're manipulative, then that's not going to go very well. And a lot of people are probably going to catch on to what you've got going on. But if you're coming from a good place, you're coming from love, then people will sense that. And you'll be surprised, actually. What I've found is sometimes you share things that people you don't think will be well received. Like, you look out into the world and you're like, I don't know if this is going to go over so well. But that's kind of like your ego's perception of where you think people are. And the weird thing is that everybody's mind is sort of naturally connected spiritually. And so you'd be surprised how many people will be like, oh my gosh, I was thinking the same thing. Or I had a dream a few nights ago where I basically had the same vision as you. So sometimes when you think, oh my gosh, how am I going to share this information with people? You'd actually be surprised at how many people may be thinking the exact same thing as you, because usually when information comes in, it's not like one person gets it. Usually a lot of different people will get it at the same time. So keep that in mind as well. All right. Another question here. Hi, Gigi. If I understood correctly, you said recently that animals were once part of humans, then we cast out of us so long ago. Since animals are one step below humans in the hierarchy, and humans are one step below angels, does that mean that humans were once cast out of angels? Hope that makes sense. Thanks for all you do. What a phenomenal question. Okay, so this person is actually talking about human development in what we call in anthroposophy the Lemurian epoch. So, as I've mentioned a lot on my channel, our greater post-Atlantean epoch is divided into 7 sort of developmental phases. And the Lemurian epoch is the era in which humanity begins to physically manifest on the planet. The 2 earlier epochs of humanity are astral. And this is actually, if there was one thing that I could get through this year, or one of the most important things is to understand, like, listen, humanity has not been physical for a portion of the Earth's development. Okay, it was astral. And over time, like a process of condensation, humans materialized in the physical plane, and they materialized as condensing as a direct image of God. That's what made in the image means. So human beings we weren't created from like apes or something. We literally materialized here through the assistance of the spiritual hierarchies, or the angels and God. And that's what Genesis is all about, to really get down to it. The 7 days of creation are the epochs of humanity. They're not days, they're longer periods of time that are called days, very similar to how it's described in the Indian traditions. Okay? So humanity was not solid for the earlier period of our development, and the human being was actually merged with the planet itself. What would become the human being was sort of merged with the planet itself, and the planet's kind of like an atom or an Adam, and everything is within it. This is like the teaching of Adam Katamon, okay? And then eventually over time, you get densification. And with densification, you also get separation of individualities and individuals. Now, the first things that break off, and by the way, every epoch, there's a recapitulation of the prior phases, and then something new is developed. So that's planetary development, anthropogenesis, and cosmogenesis. And so when you finally get to our, our epoch and where we are developing now, you get to the Lemurian epoch, and humanity finally physicalizes in matter as we know it. We had less dense forms earlier. We finally materialize after an incredibly long time of the planet not even being material at all. And as humanity materializes, there is sort of like an incredible pressure. And there is this forcing almost of the creation and perfection of the form by the cosmos at large. And the way actually that Rudolf Steiner says it is that there were certain, I guess you could say, beings or archetypal forces that could no longer stay bound, and they began to break off. And that is what we understand as the animals. Obviously, it's very bizarre to describe this because we're so deeply set in matter at this point that it's hard to even think of what an etheric human would be like, or what an astral human would be like. But that is essentially the incredible thing about our existence and our early manifestation, is that everything was actually once inside the human being and the earth. And the earth and the human being were united. Every plant, every potential mineral, every animal was all one within the human being and the planet. And the planet is basically the personification. The human being is a personification of the planet. And so the plants, the animals, the mineral kingdom, they technically all stem from the planet and the human being. All right, so that's actually the esoteric metaphysical early beginning of humanity. And so that is what this individual is talking about. And generally, when we're looking at like the structure of the human and the angels, there is the subhuman kingdoms of life, which are inhuman, which include animals, animal essences and animal spirits, elementals, plant spirits, and things like this. These are usually called, in the Eastern traditions, they're usually called divas. And in Western Celtic traditions, these are sometimes known as the Fae. And these are technically subhuman because they're not yet able to take a human form. All right. And there are 7 waves of life, including animals, plants, and humans and elementals. Okay. Now above the subnatural world or the subnatural realm is the natural realm. The natural realm is the human realm. It's what we would understand as the entire 3D plane of existence. This is the human realm or the earthly realm, and it's called the natural realm. Okay, so now we've got the subnatural beneath us. That's also symbolized as being associated with the earth, the inner earth especially. And then we've got the human kingdom, which is the natural kingdom or the natural world. And then above us, we have the supernatural, which includes essentially angels. And there are 9 hierarchies of angels above us. And every hierarchy of angels represents essentially an initiation point for humanity. Okay. So that's the structure. There's a subnatural world, and the subnatural world becomes demonic when you have like human souls that revert backwards or angels that fall. They become trapped in the subnatural world because they're technically now behind humans in development. And human souls can also get trapped in this realm. And that's when things become demonic, right? And so human beings didn't break off from angels. Human beings are the midpoint or the balancing point of development for a planet. So they're like they're the point in the center. They're the evolutionary point. And every single being in the angelic hierarchy has a sort of human life in its own, not a human life, but it has that sort of balancing life. And then it's more like human beings will rise to the level of angel upon, essentially when we get past this planetary phase, we'll rise to the level of angel in what is called New Jerusalem or New Jupiter. That is when humanity reaches the level of angel. Angels will then potentially graduate to archangel. Archangels will become archi, and so on and so forth. So the cosmos is like one kind of clock of initiation, right? So I hope that makes sense in regards to the kingdoms. Everything really only can exist in one of those 3 kingdoms of life: the subnatural or subhuman, the natural, which is the human, and the supernatural, which includes the angelic. Okay. All right. Frederica Luciero, could you elaborate on how the first 7 celestial beings came to be, the 7 Elohim, and what each one represents? Okay. So the term Elohim is sort of like the term angel. I believe it just means messenger. However, we're not just looking at the term, we're looking at the context in which the term Elohim is used. And this is in a creative sense, in the creation of humanity. So the Elohim are the beings that humanity is made in the image of. Now, in this case, what we're looking at is the solar angels. All right. And so in this way, the Elohim are the 7 solar spirits that reside in the sun, in which Christ is one. Christ is the highest of the 7 solar spirits. And so we're talking about the archangel level here and the solar archangel level. And they're also represented as in the 7 rays of light. And so every single Elohim technically will take on a ray, one of the 7 rays of the rainbow. And the Father, or the Logos, is basically the white sun or the white light. And if you shine the white light or the white sun through a plate of glass, you'll get that splitting and raying into 7 distinct lights, 7 distinct rays. And so those are also represented as the Elohim. Now, we use that term in esoteric Christianity, but this has been observed pretty much in every single religion. In the Eastern tradition, you had these 7 sort of cosmic Buddhas, or the 7 Dhyani Buddhas. You have the same thing in other Eastern traditions. In Asian traditions, you have these 7 Buddha that are resting and essentially raying their energy upon the earth, from the sun. And so these are the still angels, the still spirits that beam their love and the very essence of their being to create our world. So that teaching exists in Christianity, and even going back to ancient India, you have them projecting aspects of their soul downwards into human beings, and these human beings were called the 7 great rishis. And these 7 rishis in ancient India started the Indian civilization in around 7000 BC. And so the Elohim are always at the very basis of our form, because they are the solar angels and the highest solar angels, and they are the intermediary between the sun, right, the Christ, and humanity. Because humanity, when we come into our material form, we actually can't just purely receive the sun. It's too concentrated, it's too powerful, and so we have to receive it through the 7 rays. And so this is where we get the great kingdoms of angels that essentially become the arms of God, and the highest ones are considered to be the 7 Elohim. They're also considered to be, well, actually, I have an entire video. I have an entire video on the Elohim. If you want to know, just go to my channel here and just type in Elohim. I have like a 30 or 40 minute video that just talks about the Elohim and all the different traditions. And there's even versions of it in First Nations teachings as well. They're sort of like 7 Christ figures. And so they're incredible solar initiatory spirits that essentially sacrifice aspects of their own being, of their own consciousness, to create impulses here for us to evolve. There's nothing more loving or positive than that, right? Okay. And the whole school of the masters and mystery schools, everything is sort of fashioned around them and around the how the spiritual hierarchies operate. Okay. This is from a member, and you said, do you know if Jesus knew what he came here to do? Some anthroposophy authors make it sound like he had to figure it out and come up with a solution to save man. But I would think that the Essenes knew pretty much exactly what he came here to do and even prepared him for it, no? I would agree with you. So yeah, just coming off of Christmas, around Christmas time, everybody starts talking about Jesus, and there's a lot of controversial comments and things like that, which is very interesting. And a lot of people say that, like, Jesus was a Jewish person, a practicing Jewish person. This is actually not true. He was an Essene. So the Essenes are actually different than the Jewish people and the Jewish culture of the time. So he was in a mystery sect and essentially raised in this. And the Essenes were very different than the culture of the time and the Jewish traditions of the time. And the Essenes, they understood a lot of the deep mystery teachings, and they knew that Christ was going to be born, and they knew that his life was going to be basically one big ceremonial rite for the earth and for humanity. And they absolutely prepared him. They knew he was coming. They knew what, the women that were going to be involved. And, but just because that deep spiritual mystery sect that he was born into, and that, he was in and he served from, just because they knew who he was, and they could also tell through the cosmos, through the astrological chart as well, because there's certain gates that open and close at certain times. And so gates that the soul incarnates into according to certain times. So they knew when he was coming and who it was and everything like that. But it doesn't mean that Jesus knew. It doesn't mean that he completely understood everything that he was going to do, because ultimately Jesus was a channel, and he gave himself, his body, his form, to the Christ. So he had to go through very specific preparations for that. And it's a little bit more complex than I think is often talked about, but in anthroposophy we do get into that. So I think that a lot of people, the high priest and his order, they would have known he was coming, but it doesn't mean that Jesus fully understood or even potentially fully accepted it all the time. And so I think that Jesus had his own journey in understanding what his purpose was, like all of us. And so that's what I would say there. But he was obviously an extremely advanced individual. Okay, cat and dog confessions. Will taking certain mass recommended virus affect your spirit's path after physical death? Well, this has been a very big question in the spiritual community, and a lot of it actually got started from a Rudolf Steiner lecture that was published around 1910, in which he predicted that one of these would be invented that would essentially separate the spiritual bodies from the physical body. And so you can imagine the last few years, the people that were looking at that incredible prediction by Rudolf Steiner and being like, oh my God, how did he know this? How did he know this was coming? Rudolf Steiner's work around Ahriman and materialism and transhumanism was, a century ahead of where we are now. And it's eerie to read it. The Electric Doppelganger is an incredible book that it's done very well in summarizing the Ahrimanic sort of influence that we're all under, that this question also was sort of getting into. And so how I see it is that this is how I personally see it, but I do want to let you know that there was a phenomenal anthroposophist that wrote a book on this. I believe his last name is Meyer. You guys, please let me know in the chat the individual who wrote a book on this specific topic. I want to say it's Meyer, but I'm not sure. And so how I see it and explain it is that we can pretty much only work upon and utilize what we can kind of sense and what we're connected to. So what can happen is that if the human form becomes too synthetic, and unfortunately what this does is creates a synthetic process inside of you. It's a modification technology. It's introducing a synthetic, synthesized process to your already natural process. And so that synthetic process that's now going around creating these spike things and creating these different things, it's like a little machine in there. And now that synthetic process is competing with your organic process. And so now when you have this competing essence within you, it can become harder to sense your spiritual self. And this is what can cause a rejection of that. This is what can cause you to not work upon it, to not integrate it. Because if you have a competing process that's essentially synthetic, then you actually have something that's like, it's like something's in the room with you. It's like you have something else going on that's causing a distraction. It's causing a competing sensation. And it's already very difficult to meditate. It's already very challenging for many people to actually feel spiritual sensations in their body. We're already overstimulated. Our nervous systems are often just on the very, edge. And so we do not need to be adding these synthetic things to us because we're already very overwhelmed. And so I think that it depends on the person, but I would not recommend engaging with these kinds of things. And I think over the last few years, people are questioning it anyway. But our dying process and our death process is essentially sort of based on how we live our life, and especially how much we've integrated our soul, how much we've spiritually evolved. And so death and dying can be very difficult, mostly, I would say, not necessarily for people who have received one of these. I think it's the most difficult thing is whether or not you've spiritually progressed in your life. That's typically what makes the death process very difficult or very smooth, is that, you essentially re-experience to a greater extent your thoughts and emotions. And this is not some kind of punishment for you. It is so that we can gain mastership and we can understand very deeply who we are and what we're doing. It's part of how we evolve. And so I wouldn't necessarily say that just because you have one of these, that it's all over for you or anything like that. That's not my personal read. But I think it can create an interference, which makes it difficult for you to sense certain things. And so that's what I would say there. Okay, here's another member question. A follow-up to the blood discussion. There's another trend in the spiritual community that talks about Rh negative blood as superior because it's the untampered, true human blood. They claim it's more spiritual and somehow more special. It's not outright derogatory, but it just feels like it puts down the Rh positives as something gross and mundane. Nobody wants to be Rh positive. How can I frame this better in my mind? And if there is actually truth to Rh negative being more human. Okay, so I'm actually liking the frame of this question more than I've liked hearing some of the Rh negative questions. Usually when I hear an Rh negative question, it's part of the fallen angel worship cult, which is also very connected to Nazi esoterica and the Third Reich and this idea that we were created by aliens and that the Rh negative blood is actually fallen angel blood. And if you have this fallen angel blood, you're basically like a god And then, you know, other people, especially people like who are not white, you know, they don't have the blood of the gods. And of course, I'm sure you can imagine where that goes. I've already talked about this extensively in Mars Mysteries, about how bizarre that idea is and how esoterically it is not sound. So I think this is a good thing to bring up again, because I want to keep saying this. Your blood doesn't matter that much. So in the Atlantean era, or the Atlantean epoch, that was an era that was defined by what we would call blood memory. And it was also defined by sex. So that's where you get the sex magic and the blood magic. And when I say blood memory, I mean that the kind of blood that you had, and even now I'm not talking about like if you're A or B, I'm talking about actually an equation that happens when you become psychically oriented. Your blood acts as a kind of receiver. So it's not actually technically like in the blood, okay? When we talk about blood memory, we're not talking about like necessarily like it being in your blood. It's actually a psychic, spiritual alchemy that happens through your blood. So your blood is the medium, okay, to connect spiritually, to access the Akashic records, or to access certain streams that would have been created by your ancestors. So it's not necessarily like in your blood, it's that your blood, when going through a spiritual alchemical process, allows a certain kind of connection. Okay, so it's slightly different. And again, this is not to do with positive or negative. This is just even more tribal. And so in the Atlantean period, that's what in anthroposophy we considered like a pre-Christ period. Now, when Christ incarnates halfway through the post-Atlantean epoch, the blood is changed. That's the whole point of esoteric Christianity and understanding where we are in time, is that the blood is not the same as it was the day before Christ died in Golgotha. Our blood is different. And the earth is different because Christ's blood went into the earth and changed the etheric and spiritual bodies of the earth, because it was containing the sun within the blood, which spiritualized the planet and began the planet's ascent as a star, and began humanity's ascent, which is the ascension or our resurrection, the beginning of our resurrection. Okay, so Atlantis and the Atlantean epoch is a pre-Christ epoch. So that means we lived in tribes, and you did not want to mix blood. And this is not even necessarily a racial thing. Whatever clan you were in, you only wanted to basically marry people and have a sexual union with people who were very close to your clan. Because if you mixed blood, it would stop that alchemical wisdom process of getting information. Because now you'd have too many different chaotic streams and you would not be able to get the wisdom of your ancestors. You wouldn't be able to get all the spiritual wisdom. And there's actually a lot of people who don't observe Christ. They don't understand esoteric Christianity. They don't understand what that sacrifice was about. They don't understand Jesus. They don't understand the mystery of the blood. And so they stay stuck in this Atlantean epoch as though we're still like living in Atlantis, and we're not. You know, this is a massive problem. They even think they can invent these Atlantean technologies again. We're not in Atlantis. It's 100,000 years ago. Doesn't make any sense. Our mind is totally different. Our body has different organs in it than it did there. But there's a lot of people that just operate like it's still Atlantis. And this is very hard. It's very one of the things that really stops people from developing, it stops society from developing and becomes an antagonistic force, is that people don't understand where we are in time. And they stay stuck in the patterns and traditions and and mindsets of these old epochs. They can't let go. They can't evolve. And so this obsession with blood, the obsession with tribe, that's part of it. And there's many secret societies that completely operate with that ideology, and it's dangerous for society. And so the blood is like, and I've seen this too in the spiritual community, where it's like, oh, you know, I'm RH negative, so like I can connect with the gods, and you're like a lowly RH positive with like I don't know, like monkey stuff in there or something. It's weird. Okay, the blood is not the defining point of your spirituality or your existence. It hasn't been that way for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. And even when it was that way, it wasn't being presented like this. So there are different kinds of blood. There's an entire mystery teaching about how the blood was developed and built up in the body. First, we had clear fluids, and then over time, we developed red blood, right? There's entire mystery teachings about how our anatomy has come to be, how our organs formed, how the blood was built up over epoch to epoch to epoch to be what it is. Right. And it's this, we really have to, in the spiritual community, you know, get over this idea of like superiorities and inferiorities. Okay, that if you're a certain blood type, you're better and you're going to be more spiritual than someone else, or if you're a certain race, or if you're a certain this or that. Like this doesn't mean, it's a waste of your time. Okay, anybody can evolve and grow and heal through the Christ impulse that's within their body, that's within their entire heart center. That's the truth. That's the reality. That's the only thing that matters. That's the important thing. Okay, that's what we need to really focus on. Okay. Like things about the blood and the blood's development in the body are interesting. Understanding the idea of blood memory, you know, is interesting. But again, we have to understand the observance of time and that humanity evolves. We don't even have the same kind of consciousness we did 500 years ago. We're also developing slowly different organs, and we're changing. So it's this bizarre thing that people get caught up on. They think like the earth has always been in the same condition. Humanity's been in the same condition. Absolutely not. Right. And if you want more on this, I think Rudolf Steiner does a very good job with blood as a very special fluid. He gets into the some of the spiritual aspects of it, and I think that's a very good place to start. Okay. Son of a bear. I love that. So is Son of a Bear, is this a King Arthur reference? I like that. Okay. And you asked, is there a strong likelihood of an extended power outage in the next few years? Or is that just empty predictive programming? So I think everyone watching this, I mean, I have been hearing, I mean, when I made Mars Mysteries, I had to read all kinds of sort of strange channeled material. And I believe it was like the raw information, the raw teachings with Elkins. And they kept going on about like 3 days darkness, that there would be a magnetic pole shift and then 3 days of darkness and your power is going to go out. And that was decades ago. And I found that in some other kind of strange channeled material. And then I noticed that it started to come up with these different individuals that were associated with like with Gaia and like the History Channel and stuff. And so now it's like, you know, we're going to have, you know, this period of darkness and we're going to have a cyber attack. And so I've been noticing this and seeing this for years. And I think that it's definitely been a seed that's planted. But I mean, this is a common sense prediction. Like, I wouldn't call this, I wouldn't say, I mean, I think anybody can guess this. I mean, if you look for 1 second how dependent everyone is on the internet, and you think about how much power this would give the permanent government to do something like this, I think this is absolutely on their list of things to do. And I think they're just figuring out when to do it. That would be my analysis there. So make sure that you're prepared for that. Make sure that you have supplies stored away. Make sure that you've thought about it, you know, what you would do. And make sure you understand what it means. Is it going to happen tomorrow? I don't know. But I do know that certain groups have fixated on this, and they're in the business of consolidating power. They're not like electrical power, but they're in the business of consolidating the world. They want to basically do a great reset. They want to take it all. And so they're definitely going to probably do some things like that. I think there's also a level of keeping people anxious and keeping people fearful and keeping people in terror. You know, I think they want people to live in a way that they're always looking around the corner and they're always afraid something's going to happen. And so my recommendation is to not live in fear. If you think that something's going to happen, prepare yourself for it and let it go. Right? Just prepare yourself for it. Prepare yourself for the worst. Don't ignore it. And then let it go. So if it does happen one day, you psychologically prepared yourself, right? And you have everything that you could physically need. You've got candles, you've got food, right? You've got maybe a support system that you're in communication with. You've got maybe a radio, whatever that it is that you need. Make sure that you have all these things. And then you're not getting consumed by the fear, which actually kind of, I think, is part of why, I think it's kind of part of why all this weird predictive programming comes out, is so we can be afraid. Okay. This is another member question. Hey, Gigi, thanks for all you do. Well, it's my joy. Can you comment on menstruation and blood magic in our society? How common is blood magic, and what role does blood play in sex trafficking and abductions? Are certain people targeted due to their blood memory or level of etherization? Okay. So I've mentioned earlier that a lot of the darker, it's really just one darker group. How they operate is basically in a style of Babylonian magic. It's Babylonian black magic. We would call it black magic. For them, they're probably raised in that. And for them, it's just part of their culture, their family. And they believe in it and they operate from it. And they, again, have no idea that we're no longer in an era or an epoch that would support anything like that. But yet they're kind of continuing on to try to do these practices and things that don't really make sense for humanity or the planet anymore, and actually become obviously antagonistic. And so one of the things that exists is actually, there's an aspect of it that is actually goddess worship. And it's a dark goddess worship. So it's not Mary, right? It's not really even Eve. It's Lilith. And there's an intense worship of Lilith, which is called basically Adam's first wife. But what Lilith really represents is the old moon epoch. So Lilith can also be seen as like the great mother's shadow self. So if you take everything that a woman should be and then you invert it. So instead of being nurturing, she's cruel. Instead of loving children and wanting to have children, she wants children to die and to consume them. This is also the witch in Hansel and Gretel. That's Lilith. Okay, so this is a shadow aspect of the feminine. And there's a lot of different individuals that obviously worship her. And the reason why these different individuals worship her is because the sort of fallen entities in the cosmos, they're very easy to work with. They're not sophisticated. So if you want to work in the light, you have to purify yourself. You have to sacrifice your ego. You have to humble yourself. You have to take on incredible burdens. You have to give up material addictions. You know, there's actually an intense process and difficult process of purification to work in the light. You have to unite your own ego and your own self with Christ, with God, and you have to be a servant of God. But with darker entities, including Lilith and other fallen angel forces and demonic entities, you don't have to do any of that. You can just be a complete psychopath, and these filthy creatures will serve you, but it's at a very high cost. And so where Mary and the high goddess figure in Christianity and in the world, she is perceived as chaste. She is perceived as pure because she completely controls her lower three centers. And they are purified. They do not control her. She controls them. She channels that power entirely. That's what that means. That's what that virginal essence means. Lilith is the opposite, and she uses sexuality and sex to control people. She likes blood. She is the dark mother. She is the dark mother. And so there are certain orders that have Lilith at their top. They don't have the Great Mother at the top because they wouldn't even recognize her. And the moment they laid eyes upon her, they would see their own horrors and be terrified. But Lilith, they can work with. The Dark Mother, they can work with. And by the way, Lilith stands on the dark side of the moon. She stands in the dark part of the moon. And she is there because she's the embodiment or the dross of the prior eras of the earth. Now, the prior epochs of the earth are always held in the feminine form. A female entity has to hold the past and be at the gate. That's why you see, you know, the image of the high priestess or Isis, or even sometimes Mary, and she's veiled. That's to show you the veil of time. And she sits at the precipice of when one age turns into another. And so this is also talked about in anthroposophy as the three mothers, and also in Faust, Goethe's Faust, as the three mothers. And he says, the three mothers, they are finding me. Okay. This is getting into the feminine mysteries and the teaching of the path of the mothers. Okay. And so she's sort of like the Antichrist in a way, the same kind of thing, where she's like the fallen feminine, like every dark possible fallen feminine that is represented really in the prior lunar epoch. And so in the feminine mysteries, in very early times, there was the consumption of fluids. Now, this has got to be just it's become one of the most bizarre, ridiculous things I've seen, especially when you start getting into like Aleister Crowley and what he was doing with it, just weird. And so the actual original secretions were clear. Okay, nobody drank blood, nobody did that. And then over time, men began to have more and more psychic and intuitional powers. And they no longer needed the milk and the honey of the feminine because they were developing pineal gland and pituitary gland themselves. And so this actually goes back to when men and women were needed to do psychic work together as a union. Okay, this is in Lemurian Atlantis. And so over time, males began to get the organs and the ability to be more intuitive, and women began to develop the mental faculties that was typically in the male form. Because in earlier periods, we were more separate in our capacities. The more we go forward in time, the more we take from one another, and it becomes evened out. And so what dark black magic groups have done is they've taken this rite that doesn't even exist anymore, hasn't existed again for like 100,000 years, and they turn it into some dark, weird, sick thing where they're like consuming blood or consuming, what Q talks about. And it's a continuation of a process and a ritual that cannot even exist anymore. So that is essentially the part about black magic and trafficking. It's all dating back to certain temple cultures in Atlantis, really, that were tried to continue on into our era, that had to do with certain fluids that were once naturally produced and consumed ceremonially. That may be very disgusting to you. You may not believe that. That's fine, but that's how things operated in mystery temples at the time. And then that went away. But this group has found this weird way of trying to continue that on, but using like blood. And it was never that way. So it's literally something that they just made up. And the reason why blood is used is because at the very basic level, blood will summon the lowest forms of elementals and they'll feed on it. And so that is basically what that is connected to. Obviously, this probably deserves a longer lecture, but I think you guys get where I'm going with it. And I think in their mind, don't forget that the people who ascribe to this Babylonian style black magic, yeah, they have chronicled, they're obsessed with blood. They're obsessed with your genetics. They have not let go of the tribal consciousness of Atlantis. They have not let it go. They do not understand how blood operates today and how the human being genuinely operates today because they do not understand Christ. They do not factor Christ into their worldview. And so therefore they do not understand blood. They do not understand the blood. And so what ends up happening is that they become obsessed with genetics, right? And they want to try to find people who they think are related to, these exalted lines that they feel exist. It's just all part of that Babylonian tradition that is a materialist tradition that thinks that the human being and the blood of the human being and the race of the human being is the most defining factor of that person's existence. It's not. Your blood, your race, your gender, the physical form and anything about it is not the defining power of the individual. Hasn't been for a long time. But there are certain occult schools that 100% think that it is. They think that the blood that you have, the genes that you have, is the most important thing. The most important thing, the defining thing. Now, of course, blood memory it's still real. We still have a blood memory. We can still connect with our ancestors. We still have blood memory. It's not that that goes away. It's not that any of the patterns that we participated in prior epochs go away. It's that they become less powerful as we evolve. They don't take as much of a commanding, defining point in who we are. And our purpose now is to spiritualize out of the material plane, which is in the Christian mysteries, this is the building of the resurrection body. Right? So the whole point is not to worship the physical form or worship blood or worship genetics. We're leaving the material plane now. We're transforming our earthly body into a divine etheric body, which is called the resurrection body, which is the resurrection mysteries, as I've said many different times. The earth itself is dematerializing slowly and turning slowly into a star, as it once materialized from a star-like being. So these are materialist ideologies that sometimes they're easy to access because the material thoughts and things are easy, but they don't make sense esoterically. They don't make sense spiritually. They don't make sense in the scheme of things, in the scheme of development. Okay. Okay, this is another member question. Do celebrities, politicians, and members of the upper echelon of society actually make the so-called deal with the devil? If so, how does their life and death look like? Are there any consequences? Okay, great. Great question. I think we've all been up late at night watching YouTube videos and we see the flashy conspiracy stuff where it's like all these celebrities that are basically like, yeah, I sold my soul to Satan in order to be wealthy or to be successful. I didn't understand what it meant at the time and all this kind of stuff. And so you actually can do this. You can create a pact with a demonic entity, with the devil. And when that happens, you're sort of just like in a loop with the demonic plane. And you give them access to your mind, you give them access to your body. And usually what will happen is that you'll become possessed. If you want to contact the lower planes and the Prince of Darkness himself, they will come. And how that happens is that you'll just allow all these attachments to come in. And they will use you for their purposes in the world. They'll use you to carry out their agenda in the world. And you may get fame, you may get money, you may get this material wealth, but eventually, usually as you get older, your body will begin to break down. And it's sort of like or if you become no longer useful, these darker beings don't feel like you're useful anymore, then it's sort of like a lot of the time it all gets taken away, or the body begins to break down, or very bad things start to happen, right? There's actually people who have spoken about this happening to them. And so that's usually how it goes on. But I think it's important to know that no matter how much you feel like you're entrenched in darkness, no matter how much you feel like you may have made this deal, just turn your head and your face towards Christ. Ask for forgiveness, atone, allow God into your heart, and just begin the process of making it right. You know, there's nothing that you can do to make God not love you and to make Christ not love you. There's nothing that you could do to make them not love you and not be there for you the moment that you turn towards them. You know, darkness enters us when we deny that God and Christ is within us. That's when we become susceptible. Okay, and so part of Christ's sacrifice is to lift us from darkness in our life. And so allow that in. Don't ever feel so much shame or anything that you think that like God is mad at you, or God wouldn't want you, or that Christ isn't there, that the angels aren't right there wanting you to turn towards them, because they are. And I think, you know, no human being is perfect. We're not here to be perfect. We're here because we're going to make mistakes. We get caught up in materialism. We don't know sometimes what we're dealing with. But the moment that you do know what you're dealing with, take responsibility for it immediately and be willing to make movements in your life to atone for that and you can totally transform yourself in that instant. Okay, so as in regards to the death process, again, I think that a lot of that has to just do with how you've lived your life. If you've lived it very selfishly and you have a lot of attachments, you don't have any, your individuality isn't very well developed, the death process can be harder, or it can be, you do have to get a mirror. You do have to sort of see that. And so this is why in modern times we have kind of like a fantasy view of the soul. And in earlier periods, again, they used to train you how to die. And I remember watching actually a George Harrison lecture, and he was really interested in the Eastern teachings. And he actually, near the end of his life, he began to study the death teachings of the Eastern mysteries. And he was, training himself how to pass and learning the different realms of the underworld. And I always found that very fascinating that, early Christianity and even dogmatic Christianity retains the teaching of the underworld. Things like hell or purgatory, second death, in Buddhism, it's the Naraka realms. And then, in the Eastern teachings, they also go into the process of death. And so in earlier times, the process of death was sort of like a cornerstone of spiritual understanding, because even when you dream, or even when you meditate or you practice astral travel or lucid dreaming, it's sort of like a mini death process. And so there are different things that you can do to have that be more smooth. And so, yeah. Okay, here's another question. Thank you for all that you give so generously, Gigi. You are a much needed and appreciated spiritual compass and anchor in these challenging times. Oh, well, thank you. Some biblical scholars are predicting end times by 2025 to 2030, based upon a clock that began ticking with the inception of the State of Israel in 1948. Can you address that hopefully misguided calculation? I can. So the Bible doesn't actually say when specifically the end times are. There's sort of different predictions, but what end times is the end of our age, the end of our era, right? And that can somewhat be predicted because every great civilization is around 2,160 years, and there's 7 great civilizations in one epoch. So when you get to the end times, you're technically getting to the end of an epoch. So you know roughly when it is, but usually obviously the final 3, the kind of like the final 3 eras are going to be, out of 7, are going to be considered a end time. They're going to be considered sort of tying up loose ends, purging, exposure of the darkness in the world. That's sort of how it is. And that's how it's always been. Again, like I said last time we were here, cataclysms and catastrophes are actually normal. They've happened many different times. And so that's how the biblical writers were able to even talk about Revelation and the topic itself, is they understood the mathematic calculations of the Platonic year and when an epoch would begin and end. So, what I can say about this is that there's a natural process of awakening and realization. You could look at it astrologically and say that we're moving into the age of Aquarius, that we've been in the age of Pisces. And there's a very natural process that really could be occurring if in the imaginary world that every human being was like authentic. And spiritually oriented, we could go through, an end time, and it could be a wonderful experience. It could be the exposure of our shadow self. There could be incredible communities that are built in order to create healing for the natural shadows that emerge in society at the end time, the purging that occurs within humanity at the end times. And that is possible, and that will happen in later phases of the earth when we mature. But right now, there's a lot of darkness on the planet because, again, part of the earth is darkened while part of it is light. And so what ends up happening is that you have a very dark group in the world that essentially is possessed by the Antichrist impulse. It's possessed by a dark impulse. And they want to bring about a false end times. It's not really the end times in the sense of like what the earth would naturally create and what humanity together would create authentically. Because there's certain genuine, authentic, organic things that can come about in society when humanity is unified and under a higher influence, right? But there's darker forces on the planet spiritually that are hooked up with the Antichrist impulse. It's the simplest way to explain it. And they want to bring about a false end times. And they understand that we're moving into the age of Aquarius. And they're essentially black magicians that, again, practice a kind of Babylonian style of black magic. And they think that they don't have to surrender or humble themselves before God. That's too much. They think that they are God. They legitimately think that they are gods. This is their ideology. They think they're superior to everyone beneath them, to all the little people. The little people have become annoying to them, even though these are some of the most degenerate people that you've ever seen. In their mind, because they've hoarded so much wealth, because they have such material power, they've convinced themselves that that is the evidence of them being gods. And so what they're doing is they're going to bring on a false end times, including a false Christ, which has everything to do with what's going on in the Middle East. If you think the Middle East is about oil, if you think the Middle East is about money or natural conflict, you're crazy. All right. It's about certain things that have to be established in the Middle East because a dark group wants to bring about a certain event. So ultimately, we have to know that part of what's going on right now is that these darker families and this dark group have invested everything they have into this end times that they're creating, that they're hoping can have a spiritual effect, because I think that they're trying to do everything they possibly can do to bring about the Antichrist. When he comes, I don't know, but I think that they're doing everything in their power to bring that about now. And I think people would be surprised to see who is involved in that, and people that they think are opposed politically, people who they think hate each other, right? They're all really trying to bring about this end times that they're creating. And the Antichrist, and really what I would call a technological revolution, that part of their end times is trying to get rid of energy. So get rid of the natural energy we've had before we have any solutions for it. Like get rid of all gas, get rid of all oil, create an energy crisis. It doesn't matter if gas and oil are damaging. What I'm saying is that you can't get rid of these things without a genuine solution. So this is being done to create a crisis. And when there's an energy crisis, then you get to bring in a new form of energy, okay, that they own all of the patents for, and that is an esoteric, spiritual kind of technology that actually has entities in it and is connected to the Antichrist impulse. Because everything that's going on right now is to bring that in, and that has to do with the mark of the beast as well. So there is a dark group that's trying to bring about a really false end times, because to be clear, none of these events that are going to happen in this year or in between 2030, none of these events are natural. Like, these events aren't going on because it is the result of mine and your collective consciousness and everyone's collective consciousness. No, this is a group that we would call the permanent government of the world. These are a shadow group that has been planning this for generations. This is their false end times that they can try to pull off in order to create an incredible lock upon humanity, in which the health crisis of the last 3 years was just the beginning of. We need to understand that when we are coming up to 2030, we need to prepare for this false technological revolution. And these machines or contraptions, this new form of energy, this new technological revolution that just connects right in with Antichrist forces. And a lot of other things are going to happen too, but it's just, I feel that this has to be said now about this clock that's like, oh, you know, this is when the end times is. You know, it's like, this is the false end times that a certain group wants to create in order to consolidate wealth and power and introduce this new system that they have that, surprise, surprise, completely centralizes power to them in every way, financially, but also on an occult level, okay? And what better way to do that than to starve people of energy and to starve people of a certain way of life so that they'll accept it, even though 10 years ago they probably wouldn't have. That's how these people work. There's also a fascinating article by an anthroposophist named Andrea Kulias. And there's so much great Steiner work around this, but I do believe that she said, and that Rudolf Steiner said, that Sorath, which is essentially the black sun being, like the dark logos, the dark sun logos, is supposed to sort of appear in the etheric plane around 2030. I find that extremely interesting. I do want to go back and find that quote because I am going to be lecturing on that in this year, but I do want to go back and find that lecture about Sorat and 2030, because I find it extremely fascinating that it's like, oh my God, by 2030, you'll like own nothing and we'll own everything. And you're going to be our techno slaves and you're going to eat the bugs. And it's like, well, actually, I'm pretty sure anthroposophists said a long time ago that 2030 was when Sorath would appear in the etheric plane. So I'm going to have to go back and find that. I don't want to give unfounded information, but I remember being like, oh, when I read that, it made sense to me. So I will go try to find that for my lecture series this year, but I think that may open up some understanding why everything's going on. Because keep in mind that everything that's going on is happening on a ceremonial level. We really have to get out of the idea that this is about oil or about money or about even mundane power. Like, everything that's going on is fundamentally ceremonial. It's happening on an occult level first. And that's when you understand the occult level, when you understand the spiritual level of what's going on, then everything else makes sense. Deep sense, right? Okay. Maddie Q. Hey, Maddie Q. What are your thoughts on the use of psychoactive substances in the spiritual community? Is it true that you can use these that the use of these substances can make one vulnerable to entity attachments Okay, so we have different kinds of psychoactive substances. You have natural substances like iboga, ayahuasca, psilocybin, the frog one, ibogaine or something. And these are considered plant medicines. These are considered ceremonial. You have different very early cultures that would use these in a shamanic ritual to help people connect with a spiritual plane that we become very separated from. And then you have certain psychoactive substances that are synthetic, okay? LSD, for example, and synthesized hallucinogens in a lab. Those are going to be fundamentally different. The more synthetic it is, the more bad it is for you. And also, the deeper it's going to plunge you into the lower astral plane, okay? So the first thing is that if you're depending on a plant medicine to communicate with the astral plane, then that's not very good. The whole point of a plant medicine or a shamanic rite was basically to help an individual break through initially so they could start to feel spiritual forces within them, because in our material plane we lose that, and we know that God exists, but we sometimes can't feel it. And if we can't feel God, then it becomes easier to lose that. And so there were certain substances that would be taken to introduce that feeling. And the whole point is so that you can create that on your own. Now, it's harder to do on your own, but you become very powerful when you can do it on your own. So what's happening is that people just do psychoactive drugs all the time, and they never develop a serious meditation practice. They use it recreationally. They never learn how to create those sensations or astrally project or lucid dream themselves. And so that's when it becomes incredibly harmful, because what you're doing is you're basically bursting into the lower astral plane. Because remember, if you want to actually connect with higher forces, you have to purify yourself. So obviously, if you're not spiritually evolving, you're not healing yourself, where do you think you're going to go? What kind of beings do you think you're going to connect with if you're not spiritually evolving? You're going to connect with the lowest, darkest, most trickster entities you can possibly imagine. And the worst part is that because you're just connecting with the lower astral plane and all these entities through drugs, you're not going to have any control, because when you learn how to do it properly, when you learn how to breathe properly, when you learn how to meditate, when you learn how to work with higher forces in your body, you learn how to control it. If you're just going to go and take a bunch of hallucinogens all the time, you're actually not going to be in control of what you're experiencing. How could you be? You're literally just breaking it open. You're just there. And that's where things become very difficult, because the lower astral plane is known as the Trickster Realm. And so you can have ascended masters apparently appear to you, right? And you have no discernment, because you're supposed to earn your ability to enter into those planes, and those planes will appear to you at the exact level of initiation that you have. And if you don't really have any, and you have a lot of pain and trauma, you haven't developed yourself, you haven't purified yourself, it's very dangerous. And actually, a lot of the potential DMT cults that we see, which I think Joe Rogan actually may be a part of or tends to push, and the kind of bro podcasts that are all about like, let's have a DMT party. I mean, this is dangerous. You know, this is not spiritual enlightenment. Are there times when plant medicine can heal people and can has had a positive effect on addictions. Yeah, but maybe you'd only do it like once or twice in your life, if that, for the most desperate of cases. It's not something that you want to mess with, because you want to develop these faculties naturally so you can learn to control it, so you can learn to understand it. Otherwise, it just becomes damaging to you, and it can eventually be very damaging to you psychologically. Okay, here is another member question. What is the difference between the soul and the higher self? Okay, good question. I think that, there kind of isn't really much of a difference, because it's kind of semantics here. And I always say that one of the most challenging things about students that are learning esoterica today is the myriad of different kinds of language to describe the same thing. I think that we're in a Tower of Babel moment again. And even now, we're getting different researchers and esotericists that are even still trying to rename things. Now what would originally be called either angels or demons are now being called NHI, right? Or aliens. And so the problem with actually genuinely trying to understand the world around us, the natural world and also the supernatural world, is that if everyone just keeps creating different names for things from different traditions and also new contemporary names, it just becomes very difficult for people to actually understand what's going on, because people don't know the difference. People think everything's a separate thing. People think that NHI is different than an alien, is different than an angel, is different than a demon, and suddenly there's like 50 different names for something that really there's two names for. And so I think that this is not necessarily on purpose, but I think that there's a Tower of Babel moment where language is being confused. And so how I recommend learning about this is to choose a system. I chose anthroposophy, and learn that system. And in that system, there is essentially what would be considered the I. It's also considered the ego or the self, or really what you could consider the soul. But there's other sheaths that are around the body as well. There's the mental body or the astral sheath. There's the etheric body, which is sort of in between the spiritual and the physical, that creates a template for the physical body. So what we actually know as the soul in esoterica, in traditional esoterica, is actually a couple different sheaths or layers. And the closest thing to the soul would be the I or the ego. And that is experienced as though it's a higher, all-knowing version of yourself. That is the experience of it. So because it's the experience of it, we call it the higher self. Now, sometimes people will also call it the higher guardian angel. Again, all this different language. But I really recommend, if you're a beginner, or just if you feel a little bit confused about all this different terminology, what is what, pick a system and stick to it and learn it. And then once you understand that system and the dynamics of it, then you can go into other systems or the New Age or whatever, and you'll see that everything is sort of just a different version of classical esoteric science. Once you learn spiritual science, you can learn the structure, the laws of the cosmos, the laws of human development and evolution. Then you can see it in every tradition. You can see it's the same teachings in the Eastern tradition. You can see the same thing being fleshed out in contemporary culture using scientific language. But stick to a system, learn it, and then you'll see it everywhere. But if it's too chaotic, you're probably going to really struggle to learn the difference between simple terms, because there's just so much different language out there. Okay. Hi, Gigi. Happy New Year. Happy New Year. Happy New Year to you guys. I hope you guys are going to have a wonderful evening tonight, and ring in the new year with joy. Okay, so is the cosmos always fighting towards peace? What is considered celestial peace? Okay, good question. So I think that there's a natural drive towards homeostasis, which we would consider as peace or serenity emotionally. The cosmos is best understood as the spiritual hierarchy. So when we look up at the cosmos, we're looking at the supernatural world. And when you look at a different planet, right, you're looking at the physical representative of another plane. And the angels in the spiritual hierarchy exist within that planetary sphere. But better said, not necessarily the physical sphere, right, but the orbit of that sphere between the earth. So really, when we look up at the sky, we're looking up at the spiritual hierarchies primarily. And there's a phenomenal lecture by Rudolf Steiner that says that in earlier cultures, in Atlantis, and of course Lemuria, humanity used to look up into the sky. And they didn't just see the stars. They didn't just see planets. They saw great beings staring down at them. They saw the spiritual hierarchies staring down at them. They saw the angels staring down at them. And now this is why in modern esoterica, you see that every angel is associated with a planetary sphere. Michael is associated with the sun. He's a solar angel, right? That's connected to the Elohim, obviously. And then you have Gabriel, who gave the Annunciation to Mary. You know, this is the lunar angel. And so you have these different hierarchies of angels that are associated with not just the planetary sphere, but really the space between a planetary sphere and the earth. So you can imagine, you know, if you can just imagine the orbits, that's where the celestial hierarchies are. So we have to actually train ourselves to not just look at, like, you know, it's not just, the moon is not just a rock. You can't call yourself a spiritual student and a spiritual person and then just talk about the moon being basically like a rock or Venus being like a rock. You have to understand that that is a being. The moon is a being. And there are hosts of lunar beings that are called angels, right? There's an entire hierarchy that's represented in the cosmos, and that's actually taking up that space there. There's spiritual beings living there, okay? And this is why some esotericists also fought against the heliocentric model. It wasn't that it's not true in the material plane, it's just that when we took on the heliocentric model, which is that everything goes around the sun, we ended up going into materialism, because from the geocentric model, you can see all of the different spiritual hierarchies. And you can see the death process and the rebirth process from the geocentric model. So when the early teachers were geocentric, it's not that they didn't know that the earth was going around the sun. I mean, certain mystery schools absolutely knew that. They knew about the sun, the central sun, but they were trying to keep it so that you could see the proper orbits in relation to the earth. Because when we center ourselves around the sun, we lose that. We lose the earth as the starting point for spiritual analysis. Okay, so that's the structure of the cosmos in regards to spiritual beings and even the human death and rebirth process. And so are we fighting towards peace? There's always spiritual forces that are trying to keep things in harmony. It happens every day. There's always battles between dark and light. This happens within you every day, within your body, within your mind. It happens within society at large, and it happens in the spiritual kingdoms as well. And you can see that by there being certain times in cosmic evolution when certain angels fall and they get cast down into the center of the earth, and other angels graduate into yet higher hierarchies in the heavens. And so I wouldn't necessarily, I would say that that's a fundamental activity. In our earthly plane, that is a mix of dark and light, there's always a battle for homeostasis going on, and that's how we learn. But there's a larger pattern as well, which I think is good to mention here, which is that every civilization, and again, there are 7 great civilizations in one epoch, right? So every civilization has a rise and a fall, a kind of lighter age and a darker age. And so you have, 7,000 years ago, you have the great, or 7,000 BC, you have the great Indian civilization rising after the fall of Atlantis. You have the 7 rishis. It reaches a peak and then it falls, right? And then you have another civilization rises, right? You have the great Persian civilization that rises. It reaches a peak, it falls, and there's a period of decadence at the fall. And then you come into the Egypto-Chaldean era, and you reach a peak, and that Egyptian Babylonian culture reaches a peak, right? A golden period. And then it falls into decadence and it goes away. And then we come into the Greco-Roman civilization, right? It has a peak. You get certain arts and culture that rises, that's from there. And then it goes into decadence and it falls. And then we have now our civilization, which is called in anthroposophy, the Anglo-German civilization. And it rises into this sort of the high point of science and intellect. And then now we see it fall. And there will be 2 more civilizations that come. The next one, according to anthroposophy, is called the Russian or the Slavic civilization. The one after that is called the American civilization. And so we can see that there is a micro battle between sort of light and dark that goes on within every human being, within us all the time, within the world on a micro scale. But on a macro scale, we're also going through planetary cycles and cosmic cycles that are essentially golden ages and dark ages. Okay. And humanity and spiritual forces are really working to keep the balance through that. Okay, here's another question. Okay, please share the significance of the galactic center. Thank you. So I've already gone into detail on YouTube and also to my members about how a solar system is created. And so I'm not going to get into that, but essentially our solar system and our sun is technically an expression of yet an even higher system. And so the galactic center is sort of the centering force of our own system and others, is what I would say. And I know that it's very common in the New Age today to sort of have a very flattened view of the cosmos, as though like, there's like, you can have a person that comes from the Pleiades or this planet or that star outside of our own solar system. And that's actually, I actually don't adhere to that ideology. If you're looking at another star system, the way that I understand it is that that's a whole different kind of civilization, meaning that it is a different form of life. It has a different sun informing it, which is a completely different way of life. It's a completely different form, adhering to completely different laws. It has a different sun. Now, because we can perceive it, there will be a certain amount of overlap, right? It's kind of a different expression, but it's not the same. And so while we can understand the galactic center, we can understand certain formative stars that are part of our own sun's life, like Alcyon, like Sirius, like Arcturus. These are actually very important stars that are an aspect of our sun. We can't fully know them. In order to fully know the Pleiades, in order to fully know, objectively know Sirius and Arcturus, we'd have to be a soul and incarnate through the sun and enter into the life wave of that star system. Okay, so that's how it happens. It doesn't happen through like physically going to these places. It's actually on a soul level. And that's why also when humanity does get to the stage that is associated with Vulcan or the Arc-I stage, humanity basically leaves the solar system and becomes almost like a solar being themselves, like a Christ being themselves. And then they can understand other stars. And so there's a galactic center. There are even, it's even the same thing in a more mundane level with like Mars. Mars is obviously a planet that's in our star system. We know that Mars has its own life wave. I mean, people start making this big deal as though there's ruins on Mars. Yeah, because every planet will eventually have a life wave that animates it, and it will go through a period of life and then death, just like our Earth does. So the fact that there's life on other spheres in a slightly different rhythm to the Earth, that's not really a big deal. But even with something like our own planet, a planet in our own system like Mars, you're not really going to understand Mars unless you're literally incarnated on that planet as a being of Mars. So we can't really understand the galactic center or these other celestial bodies unless we incarnate through them and into them as a soul and take on the form of that system. Now, I also want to say, I just want to, because materialism is such a pervasive thing that, again, it's not really about going to these planets physically. Okay, that's not what this is about. That's a memory of our souls' incarnations on them, and it's a soul thing. It's a spiritual thing. It's not a physical thing. Interacting with these planets is not a physical thing. Okay, so I just want to make that clear because I think it can get a little crazy in some conversations. A lot of the stuff, in the starseed community, it's that these are spiritual things. They don't have a place in physicality the way that it's sometimes taught. Okay, where could one learn more about the feminine mysteries? Do you know any myths or stories to suggest that could be a good example for girls and young women, something that could make us remember? Yes. So the feminine mysteries and the sort of idea of the matriarchy, both the beauty of the matriarchy and the divine mother, but also the dark mother and the fall of the feminine, that happened in an earlier part of the Earth's development. And so the Earth sort of starts out as a feminine civilization and as a feminine impulse, really, and then becomes more masculine oriented over time, or mind develops over time, which is a masculine impulse. And so the feminine mysteries tend to be deeply connected to earlier culture, but the problem is that we don't really have very good memories of that. And so we're actually going to see a rebirth of the feminine mysteries from now and moving forward in time. And this is to really balance out, I think, the masculine impulse that we've been so heavily under, which is not bad, it's not evil, but we are going to have a resurgence of feminine mysteries that are within the Christ impulse. So this is not a resurface of the darkest levels of the feminine rites of Atlantis or Lemuria. This is the purified feminine rites that make sense for this time, that are part of the same stream, but are the sort of the transformed, initiating rebirth of them. And so the most of the feminine secrets have been actually held within fairy tales. And this was on purpose. So when you start getting into things like Sleeping Beauty, Snow White, Alice in Wonderland, and you read even about, if you even want to take it back to, Celtic mythology, if you want to read the mythologies of different cultures from thousands of years ago and see the archetypal feminine presences there, you'll get that. And that's how that can awaken. I do plan on lecturing on that a great deal this year as well. But pretty much the feminine dynamics and archetypes have been preserved in myth. And as time went on, the feminine was not really included. It was included less and less. And more and more people, I think, struggled with it. And it was really our task, I think, to understand the masculine and the ascension arc of humanity and the male Christ impulse. That was our task at the time. And it was very important that we do that. But we also have to understand the feminine side. And a lot of people turn their back, especially on esoteric Christianity, because there isn't enough often information in it that is speaking about the female side. And so this information is going to start coming forward at this time. And it's going to be the other side of the Marian. You also can find different authors within the Christ impulse that speak on this within the Marian tradition. That's usually what it is. So that's what I would say there, but we will be going more into that on my channel as well. You also have to remember that you have this within you as a memory. And in dreams or in meditation, you can ask to be shown these images of your soul in these different times, or of something within that tradition that could be meaningful to you. So don't be afraid to do a little soul archaeology within yourself and see what comes forward. Okay. Okay. With eyes being the window to the soul, is it true that certain entities enter through the left eye, as some research has uncovered? Brings new meaning to artists' covering of the left eye and the singer Lisa Left Eye, or Lisa Lopez, from the 90s. Thank you in advance. So much love to you and Wolf. Warmest wishes for happy, healthy, and prosperous New Year. You as well. Yes, it was believed that, especially in the Egyptian tradition, remember that Egypto-Chaldean era, that Babylonian Egyptian era, had probably the highest form of ceremonial magic that we know. And sort of after that point, all of the magical processes were drawn inside the human being, meaning that after the incarnation of Christ and the changing of the blood, the evolving of the blood system, and again, our blood system has evolved over time, but when we get the incarnation of Christ, it really changes the blood, and it changed the way the human being was organized. And it made it so a lot of the things that had to be done through outward magic, these rituals and things, could be done within the human being. So it became an inner potentiality or an inner process. This is what is meant by the kingdom of heaven is within. It means that all these actions that had to be these huge ceremonies and rituals, they became possible to do like that inside the human being. They became integrated. But there's still people, again, who don't understand that and still do all these kind of elaborate things. And so how we can look at that is that the human body is actually an exact mirror of the cosmos. And one eye is the sun, and one eye is the moon, or one eye is the black sun, and one eye is the white sun. Okay? And so when you would cover one eye, right? Like, for example, I believe the left eye is the moon or the black sun. And so when you would do that, you would be able to see certain entities that were associated with black sun, that were associated with the lower sub-earthly realms, and spiritual forces that were basically within that ray, that spectrum. It's the same thing with the other eye. And that's why certain people, I think, would do that. There's also a reference to the one-eyed God, which is sometimes portrayed as Saturn, sometimes obviously as Odin. Odin is known as the one-eyed God. So there's a lot of, I think sometimes people just do it because, like, if you're taking a photo, there's only so many different things that you can do, like with your hands. I don't think that everybody means to do it, but it definitely, covering the eye is like basically saying that you're God. It's like saying, I'm the one-eyed God, and this is either the dark or the light, right? If one eye is darkness and one eye is light, one eye is black sun, one eye is white sun, one eye is moon, one eye is sun, then you're showing which stream, light or dark, you are connected to and worshipful of. And remember, the lunar stream, it's not that the moon is bad, but the lunar stream is the gate to all prior epochs of existence and the entities that have fallen in those epochs, right? So moon, black sun, Saturn is actually called the dark corridor, which is basically like the corridor of descension or second death. So when you start getting into the dark side of the moon, the black sun and Saturn, you start getting into basically second death or the death process. When you get into Mercury, Venus, Sun, you're getting into the ascension arc. And so those are the two pathways. And so people are kind of connecting, and why people want to connect with moon, black sun, Saturn pathway is because there's a lot of really powerful fallen angels in there. There's a lot of demonic presences that will give you a ton of information, how to build this or do that, right? With no responsibility. So a lot of people will actually worship the darkness. They'll worship the black sun. They'll worship like the lunar impulse, the dark lunar impulse, because they want power. They want that information. Whereas higher beings, they're not going to give you that. They'll tell you how to transform your life and heal, right? They'll give you the mysteries to do with healing yourself, taking responsibility for your life. But these darker entities, these darker beings, they'll do things for you. They have hordes of darkened elementals and demonic entities and things like that. So you're looking at two different streams that the human being has access to. And you're looking on the planet of different secret societies that serve one or the other. And yes, this does go back to Egyptian mystery schools where the two eyes were viewed as the gates to these two different worlds, either the corridor of light and ascension, which was associated with Sun and Mercury, right? And then also moon or moon, black sun, Saturn, right? Okay, I'm a born-again Christian, and I feel very hesitant to ask for help from any spirit being except for praying to the Father in the name of Jesus and receiving the Holy Spirit who was promised by Christ. How do you suggest I get to know other spirits in a safe way? I'm also beginning to consider that reincarnation is a truth that has been withheld from the mainstream, but I wonder how I can begin to explore this topic as well. Great question. So I actually think that the way that you're praying is great. I think that you should pray to the Father and to Christ. And I think that's an excellent way to pray, because when you pray to those pure forces, if you need an angel to guide you, or a saint, which is an ascended human being from the saintly realm, that's what a saint is, they will be sent to you. So you just pray directly to Christ. You pray to Christ, to the Father, and whatever is necessary for you will be sent to you on behalf of those highest forces in the cosmos. So you don't really need to like reach out to like old gods, or like you don't need to reach out to any lesser entities. It can actually, I wouldn't recommend doing that. You just pray to the highest forces, and if anything needs to come to you from the spiritual hierarchies, that will come to you. And that's how it operates, because the angels and the spiritual hierarchies are like the arms of God, the arms of Christ. So if any one of those needs to come to you to assist you, or the assistance of a saint, that will come to you. A master, in other words, a saint, the saints in like Christianity are like the masters. They're also called masters in mystery teachings. And they're basically ascended, advanced human beings that are at an angelic level, but they're from the earthly sphere, whereas angels are technically from another sphere, in which the earth is an aspect of. Okay. So reincarnation is a doctrine that is obviously present in the Eastern mysteries. Karma, dharma, reincarnation, the wheel of samsara is a major aspect of the Eastern mysteries. And if you know anthroposophy, obviously the Eastern mysteries was part of the early Christ impulse. And so as time moved forward, humanity became more and more of an individual. And it became very, very important for humanity to basically be able to recognize themselves as an individual and be able to work upon themselves directly. And so what was happening with the Eastern traditions was that people were beginning to disassociate from the physical world and their individuality. The shadow side of the Eastern mysteries was that some people were starting to consider the entire material world as Maya, as illusion, and it being meaningless. And they were starting to just disassociate from their bodies and from the earth. And obviously that's a problem, because, moving from the Eastern mysteries to the Western mysteries, we have a point where we're going to get the incarnation of the literal sun, and humanity has to be able to be self-aware enough to understand that and to receive that. And if humanity is thinking that the whole physical world is Maya and it doesn't mean anything, and I'm just going to disassociate back into the collective all, which is the dark side of that, the shadow side that was occurring from the Eastern mysteries. And every religion and mystery had a shadow side that would develop naturally, of course. And so the whole Western impulse was about trying to get humanity to focus on the physical world as being just as holy potentially as the heavens, and understanding that this is a heavenly body, that your physicality is not just Maya, right? It is actually a microcosm of the macrocosm, and that your form is actually divine. And so that was actually something that became very important in around the time of Christ, and how we were going to evolve from Christ onward was through spiritualizing ourselves as individuals. You cannot do that if you think that your body is Maya and it doesn't matter, and you just can't wait to dissolve back into the Godhead again. you can't spiritualize, you can't build the resurrection body, you can't evolve, you can't etherize the blood if you don't think that your body has any purpose or meaning. And so in the darker part of the Eastern mysteries is the rejection of the earth. And that was considered very, very dangerous to the mystery schools, including what we would know as the Essenes and things like that. They were seeing that and they were like, people are associating too much with being a soul, and they're not understanding the divinity of the form. And it's the form that's going to have to be spiritualized to actually get off the wheel of samsara, to actually get beyond the physical plane. You have to accept the form and transform the form into an etheric body. So we can only basically spiritualize out of the physical world if we completely accept ourselves, accept our physicality, accept the world, take responsibility for it, and transform it through love and Christ. So the original Christian masters and scholars, this is the time of the Library of Alexandria, all that. Of course they knew about reincarnation. There's even quotes in the Bible that talk about like Ezekiel has come again or Elijah has come again. But it was not included in the Christian doctrine because part of the Christian mysteries and what became the Christian church was specifically a response to some of the darker sides that had happened in the pagan cultures and in the Eastern traditions, right? So when you get into the Christian mysteries, it's very much about understanding the form more. It's about individuality. It's about dark and light. You don't see the battle between good and evil nearly as deeply in the East. It's there a little bit, but when you get into Christianity, you really see this battle between good and evil and dark and light. That's because when you come into your body and you start looking inwards at yourself, that's what you see. You see your goodness and you see your darkness. And the only way that you can transform, again, your physical body into a glorified etheric body, which is the resurrection body, right? Which Christ did first, which Jesus did first for humanity. In order to do that, you have to be able to confront your shadow. You see that in the very beginning with Zoroastrianism, in the Persian culture, and Manichaeism. You see that very beginning of that too. But that becomes such a central part of Christianity because, again, the highest point of Christianity is to make it so every person can do what Christ Jesus did, which was resurrect, which was get off the wheel of samsara, which is to transubstantiate, not transcend the material, but to transubstantiate it, transform it by within them through the etherization of the blood. So you're actually becoming less material every life in a sense, but there's also a point which is known as the rapture and things like that is the point where you have a glorified etheric body or the resurrection body built. And this is also the secret of alchemy. The alchemists, what were they talking about? They're talking about building the resurrection body. They're talking about transcending matter through you transmutating it, which is what Christianity is fundamentally all about. And reincarnation is therefore actually part of Christianity, even though dogmatists will argue with me, because you can't actually build a resurrection body unless you have many different lives to do so. And it is about building the body because it's about responsibility. And it's about a process of the soul and human evolution over a very long period of time through Christ and with Christ, who has interacted with humanity, of course, before Golgotha, of course, before the crucifixion, of course, Christ was in the cosmos and within humanity and working with us, doing other sacrifices for us even before Golgotha. In fact, there were 3 prior sacrifices that Christ made before he transformed the physical body in Jesus at Golgotha. Okay, this is all in the anthroposophical work. You'll find that there. So in other words, a lot of what has made it into the Bible today and into Christianity today, it's important. There's a lot of good stuff in there, but it doesn't include the doctrine of reincarnation. And it doesn't include that for a reason, because the people who were the great Christian mystics who formed that were correcting an ideology that was prevalent in humanity that was from the Eastern and pagan traditions, which was too externalist. We needed to become internalists, because that is how we are to evolve. And this is also why you see this weird externalist stuff about transhumanism and technology, and we're going to transform through machines. Yeah, because this is the impulse that never went inward, that doesn't understand Christ. You become an externalist. So that's what you get in the Christian mysteries at the turning point of time, the exact halfway point of our planetary epoch. You get the shift inwards. Shift inwards. Everything was external before. Now it's inwards, and now we evolve or ascend out of matter through the building of our glorified etheric body, which is a resurrection body. Okay. Yeah. I also want to say, because I feel like sometimes around this time, people will do prediction videos. I think Sylvia Brown actually started that. She'd let go on Montel Williams. I used to watch that. And then she would talk about all the things that are going to happen like in the new year. And I've always found it really interesting because, I'll put it this way. I think that we're coming into this weird UFO alien year, which I feel a lot of us have been kind of preparing for. We've kind of seen it coming. And actually, before I was born, people saw it coming. If you look back at some of those conspiracy fathers, the fathers of conspiracy, they saw the alien religion coming. And I don't know, I just thought to mention that in a lot of like the ancient alien people's lectures, like Eric von Daniken's lectures, he'll like mention randomly that there's going to be some records that are found. Like one day, they're going to find some new pieces of the Bible. They're going to find a piece of the Book of Enoch in the pyramid. They're going to find an ancient spiritual document that basically validates the ancient aliens, ancient God religion. So I think we might be looking upon that in this year or the years to come, is this weird alien God cult that wants you to think that you've been created by these aliens, which are really just fallen angels that we've already covered and been talking about for thousands of years. Okay. I think that there's going to be a group that comes forward that says, look, we found this old piece of the Bible. Look, we found this ancient document. We've dated it, and it says this. And that is going to try to destroy the Christian faith, right? Well, it's going to try to destroy Jesus and Christ's sacrifice. And by the way, when you do that, you also destroy Buddhas and you destroy Krishnas, because that is essentially the same impulse, right? The same stream. You can't, so I wouldn't be surprised if this year or before 2030, we start to see these archaeological discoveries that usurp the existence of Jesus or our creation story, because I think it's very important that they bring in a new religion, and that religion has to glorify fallen angels, which are often called aliens today, right? Or whatever other language we want to use in this Tower of Babel time where we just create new language for everything. The same things that have been going on for thousands of years, we'll just create some new language for that, so people won't understand the original teaching. Let's call it NHI, call it aliens. origins, you know. So, because the words, don't forget, these words have been around for thousands of years. You've heard them in past lives. They're initiatory words. You don't want to change the language because you've been initiated with certain language. You've used certain language in your own past lives. Why would we change that? It's powerful to us. Anyway, so I do think that we have to be very, very, very careful this year, or at least in years to come, in these pseudo documents that allegedly or apparently completely rewrite the human origin story, and oftentimes remove Christ's sacrifice from the earth and frame the fallen angels as the real angels or as creators, or basically validate the ancient aliens doctrine, which is really the doctrine of Nazi esoterica, or the certain secret societies that are literalist, materialist, Babylonian societies, which is why they use Sumerian stuff all the time. It's just the reintroduction of Babylonian, Sumerian gods. That's what that is. It's why when you see the ancient aliens people, there's like all these pictures of Babylonian gods behind them. Yeah, they're trying to reintroduce the Babylonian religion through the Sumerian gods, which is the same impulse. Sumer and Babylon are the same location. And to do that, they have to remove Christ from the picture, confuse that person, the deity, confuse our understanding of that. And they have to confuse our origin story and redefine the Elohim as evil. And they have to that's part of it. And along with that, again, is this technological revolution that they want to create that draws you ever outward, ever external, when we should be going inside. It's time to go inward. Okay, so just a little bit heads up, just wanted to get it out there that I'm not interested in seeing any so-called documents that people start to find under the pyramid or wherever in a cave that are old, that are going to rewrite the human origin story. I'm not interested. I'm just going to say that right now. Okay. All right. Okay. This one is called Cypherdelic. Can you explain the logos a little bit? Great question. So the logos is kind of like, it's a Western esoteric term. It's a Gnostic term. And what it means is basically the Father. So the logos is the Father. And why we use the word the Father or the Son in Christian esoterica is because, as I mentioned, now at this point in time, all potentialities in nature become inner potentialities and become human potentialities. So we don't view the cosmos as like a simulation. We don't view the cosmos as a machine, because we're not a machine. We view the cosmos as Christian esotericists as beings, as living beings, because we're a living being. And that is how you can get into the secrets, and that's how you know it, because that's how our consciousness is designed. So everything that's an external, everything that exists outside of us is really now an internal potentiality that we have to come to know. So we don't look at the sun as just the sun. The sun becomes the Father, the force that has made it possible for us to exist. The masculine aspect of the Godhead, that's how we know that. And that's how we can feel that in ourselves and in our life. It's the Father, okay? And we would also see that as the solar logos, or as the sun. We also see the Father as being represented to us as the Son. Okay, so that's how we see that. And that's why you would also see in the Greco-Roman time, especially, a lot of planets and things personified, is because we have to understand that a star, a planet, a thing is not just a thing. It's a being, it's alive. And on a higher level, angelic hierarchies are even working through physical objects and through stars and through planets. And so this is actually the appropriate, correct way to view nature, to view the world, because that's how we exist, right? So that's why we call it the Father, so we can relate to it. Okay. Because it's referring to a cosmic process that's also within us. Okay. So, hello, I'm a new member and very thankful to have found your work. So, my mom is Jewish. What did I need to do to be protected from the new Nazis? Because I've heard about the new emergence of this. Yeah, okay. So, in my lecture that I titled The War of All Against All, we discuss what that phrase really means. Now, the war of all against all is a philosophical phrase. It was talked about by Hobbes. It was talked about by Jefferson, I believe, and different presidents to describe this sort of desire that humanity has when we're not refined and spiritually connected to destroy ourselves and destroy one another. And in that lecture, I talk about it being particularly prominent near what we would call the closing of our civilization, the closing of our age. And what happens, is what happens kind of at the end of an age is that you get basically a repetition of a lot of events that happened in the past that were never fully understood or cleared. And so we are seeing the resurgence of civil rights movements. In 2020, we saw Black Lives Matter. All these racial debates started happening. People's pain and ancestral pain just started coming out. And then we're also now seeing battles between genders, battles between sexuality. Well, these have always existed in the human being, and they're coming forward because of the era that we are in. They all kind of come forward in the closing of the age. We're also seeing the Russia conflict come forward. That's a Cold War era thing. It's coming back now. So all of these wounds are rising to the surface to finally be confronted because there's things that we don't understand. Now, we haven't been handling it very well. We haven't been getting, I think, the most balanced addressing of these issues that have risen. But one of these things is obviously World War II. And there's a lot that I think the majority of the population do not understand about World War II, including the reality that World War II was about fundamentally two different factions. But at the very top, it's the same people. Okay, so where we suffer is we fall into tribal consciousness and we get manipulated by people who literally control the world through divide and conquer. And at the top, it is the same people that are using different groups' hate for one another to consolidate wealth and power. That's something that we fundamentally need to understand. And of course, they use real issues, real ancestral issues, real problems that naturally happen between different groups. But at the very top is actually a mixture of the different races and people that are even supposed to be fighting. So we need to understand that we can't keep participating in this tribal warfare. Now, moving forward about what is to come, we are seeing a resurgence of, we've been seeing, to be honest, a lot of popular New Age material, as I pointed out, it reads like esoteric Hitlerism. So a lot of it is basically Miguel Serrano books and what you'd find in neo-Nazi material, aliens are gods. This is what the Ahnenerbe was about. The Ahnenerbe was about basically going back and finding relics of their ancestors that they felt were gods. That's just being called aliens now. We see that rise up through Eric von Daniken, Zachariah Sitchin, even earlier, Van Tassel. So we're seeing this just coming forward again. And so what I think, so basically a lot of what people are saying, like in the New Age and on Gaia and all these different starseed stuff, it literally is from like neo-Nazi literature. They don't realize it, but like that is the same material, right? Nobody reads it, so they don't realize it. It's just repackaged. You know, of course, you see the Nazis publicly lost World War II. The German people lost World War II. But all the high-level Nazis just went to America and started to create the alien god religion and run NASA and create space god cults, in which Elon Musk is now just continuing on. You know, Mars was Werner von Braun's lodestar. Elon Musk is just Werner von Braun 2.0. He has the exact plans of Werner von Braun. When are we going to see this? It's the same things repeating. We need to wake up. So how I think that the new sort of resurgence of the Nazi symbology and Nazi stuff, I actually think it's going to take a different form, because if you actually read their literature, which they put out all the time in these different groups actually, is I actually feel like what I think is going to happen is sort of what they always wanted to happen, which is I think that the fact that the individuals that people would call like a Nazi, a neo-Nazi or whatever, that's a cult history and sect that goes back even before the Third Reich, right? The ideology. What I think they want to do is create a race war, because part of their ideology is that the fallen angels are their parents, these alien gods, and anybody who's not part of their bloodline is a lesser being. It's a lesser entity, right? And so I think they want to ultimately create a race war. And I think that's why there's so many different people coming in the southern border. I think that's why every time I log onto social media, I basically see videos that are to inspire people to hate certain races, when in a different period it was different. And I think that eventually there will be a movement that says, listen, all white people are the same. It doesn't matter if you're Jewish. It doesn't matter if you're white. All white people are the same. We need to band up against the Black community or the Hispanic community or whatever. We need to band up against these colored people that are ruining the country and that are ruining the world, because that's what they're going to paint it as. And that was primed and fueled by the movement like BLM, which I think was ultimately corporations that were behind that. I don't think the Black community was fully behind that. I think that was controlled by different corporations, and that's what we've seen. It was a divide and conquer thing more than it was a healing thing. Even if the issues are valid and we do need to heal racially and heal with our ancestral stuff, I agree with that. But I'm saying these things ultimately get hijacked because it's so painful and because we need healing. And so ultimately, I think that why this is all coming forward is to insult, obviously, and cause division between races, because I think at the heart of the neo-Nazi or the Nazi esoteric tradition, which again is older than the Nazis were, I think it is a eugenics religion. I think it's a eugenics ideology. And when it comes to depopulation, I think that they want to keep their bloodlines alive and get rid of anyone that they consider to be beneath them. And that's terrifying, and that's what I'm worried about, and that's why I'm saying it, even though it's a very controversial thing to say. So please be careful of this. Please don't fall into this hatred for other human beings. Every human being, no matter what gender you are, no matter what color you are, no matter what political affiliation you are, we approach everyone as an individual, because that's what you are. No one can be defined alone by their race or their gender. This is childish spiritually. This is childish. Every human being has Christ within their heart and the ability to transform, just like everyone else. These blood cults that are obsessed with blood memory, that are obsessed with race and all this kind of stuff, It's going to come to a head, you guys. And we cannot accept it. It is not the way. All right. So that's what I'm concerned about. That's what I'm concerned about. And I really, really hope that I'm wrong. But at least talking about it with you, we can maybe prevent that and bring some common sense to it. So, but yeah, I do think we're going to see more and more conflict. I think we're going to see more people that are hateful of one another, because essentially people are frustrated. People see that when you go to the grocery store, it's costing more to buy a jug of milk and some bread. People are seeing that it's harder to just live life. And they want someone to blame. But you know what? It's not your black or white neighbor that is to blame for what's going on in the world. It's not. It's not that Jewish person over there, and it's not that Asian person over there. They're not the people who are responsible for what's going on in the world. It is the elite families, which we can probably call out by name at this point, that are responsible, and they deserve the scrutiny and they deserve the attention, not your neighbor. The more that we fight amongst ourselves, the more we become tribal, the more we lose. The more vulnerable we become. We need each other. And it doesn't matter what your religion is, right? It doesn't matter. We need to be human beings, and we need to focus on the specific individuals and families that are committing these crimes. Have you ever noticed that that these people who are exposing the problems, they never really get that specific? It's just sort of this eternal state of chaos where we never get to the bottom of it, right? I think we need to see that that's going on. Okay, what is the difference between our doppelganger and a dark guide? Both energies feel pushy to me, and there is this overwhelming emotion of fear. Is my doppelganger trying to control me through fear, and my darker guide trying to push me to face my fear? Can we kill our doppelganger? Uh-oh. So in my Electric Apocalypse lecture, I talk about the doppelganger and how we have what would be called a sort of dark angel that exists within the electrical system of our body, and it enters us upon birth. And this is what's also called in the occult the doppelganger. And it's also the being that we see oftentimes on the threshold, the guardian of the threshold. It's an harmonic angel or an harmonic spirit, a dark essence. And it's been shown in cartoons and things as being one angel on your shoulder and then a devil on your shoulder. And not a lot of people talk about it because we're already stressed out enough. We don't need to be talking about the creepy things around. But if you really want to be serious about understanding esoterica, you got to know the dark and the light. Otherwise, you're just not even in the game. You're just not going to understand it. You have to understand both. And so you can't get rid of your doppelganger, because this darker force, it's not necessarily like completely evil. Evil is too simple of a word. It basically works as a dark mirror of our shadow self. So we actually need it to reflect to us our own darkness. You know how there's like the Ida and Pingala, the two channels of light and dark? Well, we need entities, or we need these beings essentially, because that's what human beings are. We're either connected to dark or light. And so there's all these entities that actually serve through revealing to us who we are. And so we don't actually want to get rid of that, because we use that in order to confront our shadow and our trauma. And I would say that the doppelganger and the dark guide are the same thing. Again, we're in this Tower of Babel where there's 10 different terms for one thing, and then we think that there's 10 different things. It's not. So it's fundamentally, there is the doppelganger, or a darker force that sort of stands at the threshold and reflects our shadow to us, that we have to face. And this is like what every cartoon, show is about. This is what the final boss in video games is. It's what, in Star Wars, you're fighting Darth Vader. It's the same kind of thing. It's this essence of us that we battle with. It's Christ and Ahriman. And even when you look at like Michael and Lucifer, Michael is just very much like a Har Mazda, and Ahriman. He hasn't killed Ahriman, and Michael hasn't quite killed the dragon. He's got it under control, right? Har Mazda has Ahriman, the Persian devil, by his horn, and the other is forcing in a blade. He's controlling it. He hasn't killed it. It doesn't show him as dead. It shows him as controlling it. Michael has his foot on the dragon, right? The darkness, and he's putting his staff into it. The dragon is shown as fighting, right? This is what we must do with our dark aspect. We struggle with it. We're not there to kill it. It's actually serving us. It's not good, right? It's not light. It doesn't, it's not an initiating force in itself, but we use it. We use that force. And that's the deeper teaching of evil. And we see this in anthroposophy with the teaching of Lucifer, Ahriman, and Christ in the center. We don't view evil as being a duality, really. There's two evil forces, quote unquote evil forces. But even then, they are useful forces, right? And potentially redeemable forces. Through Christ, everything can be redeemed. Okay? So this next one is, why does my room crack and pop when I meditate? Am I just deaf to it when I'm meditating? Well, it's a good question. I think that sometimes when you quiet down, you're like, oh, I'm hungry, or you notice every pop in the room, or you notice a pain in your body that you didn't know you had, which just shows you that you need to meditate more, because being go, 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 you often don't hear the subtle. And so it could be that, but also you can build up energy in your body. Angels can come in if you call them in, and that can also cause a pop in the room. You'd have to feel into the pop. You'd have to feel into it. Okay. This is from Dalai Lamas. How do you recommend removing the 3 implants we were all born with in this epoch Steiner spoke about? Okay, so this is probably, I'm assuming, etheric implants, or sort of etheric interferences, because how it works in anthroposophy is you get like a development, so you develop, but then once that happens, there's luciferic and harmonic forces, or evil forces, that will enter into creation essentially and try to confuse. So essentially, you have to know thyself and spiritually evolve in order to clear that confusion, because that's how we experience, that's how we sort of experience what would be these kind of modifications in prior epochs, if you will, these sort of interferences that could be in the energy body, as sort of leftovers from prior evolutions. It's not necessarily about doing like these ceremonial rituals. It's really just about you evolving, you developing. the most powerful thing you can do to heal is become completely self-aware, completely responsible, and heal. Face your shadow, go inward. Feel your body. You know, that is the best thing that we can do. Okay, Sarah Ann. I've been thinking about how we can best develop our I while also navigating others' energies and demands. Can you speak about what is needed to develop our I in these times? Okay, so Sarah's using the Steiner term or the anthroposophical term, which is the I, and the I is basically your soul. It's your individuality. And we call it the I because there's a certain point where the human being on the earth becomes an individual. So we have to actually individuate from more of like a group consciousness, or what would be called like an animal consciousness. We were never an animal. The human form was never an animal, but the consciousness that we had was closer to that. It was a group mind that's associated with the animal kingdom. And so there's actually a point where we have to individuate and become an individual being, an individual soul. And we don't function as a group anymore. And so that's why we call it the I, the soul. And so it's always hard, especially I think if you're an empath, you know, if you're really sensitive, to, I think, take care of your own needs and to feel what you're really feeling. And some people can have just this impulse to, you know, relinquish your individuality and just want to serve almost too much, or put yourself aside so that others can develop. I know women can be like that because we're hardwired to have babies and to put our children first and husband first and the family first. And so we also have this on a very strong, just genetic level. And so what I would say there is that you have to be really honest about yourself and where your actions are coming from and kind of where your thoughts are coming from. So when you get an impulse to do something, you really have to feel into where it's coming from. You know, is it coming from a desire to please others? Is it coming from fear? Or is this really something that is coming from my heart? Because if it's coming from your heart center, then that's your true self. That's your I. That's your soul, right? That's where Christ rests within us as well, right? And so you have to pause and stop and say, is this really coming from my true self? My true authentic self in my heart? Or is this coming from some kind of automatic, almost robotic impulse that I have that probably is rooted in fear? Because there is this robotic element, and this is very Gurdjieff, you know, there is this very robotic element to us, which is also why we're manifesting robots as well, and everything's becoming automatic, is because that actually represents this automatic, unawakened part of ourself. So when we're not awakened spiritually, we don't really have our I developed. We become robots. We become just basically expressing impulses, expressing the urges that come about that we don't even really know why we have. That's unexamined. We become a bunch of unexamined impulses, which is basically a robot, which is basically the death of the I, or the I doesn't develop at all. And so you have to figure out the parts of you that are robotic, you know, and don't do something from an urge or an impulse. You have to really evaluate and say, is this really something that I want? Is this really something that I think? is this really who I am? And you may have to stop, and you may have to take time, and you may really have to feel that, and that's okay. You take however much time you need to make sure that you're being authentic, because you want to create a life that's real. And the more that you do that, the more that you figure out where things are really coming from within you, whether it's like a robotic urge or who you truly are, the easier and easier and easier it becomes. So in the beginning, you may feel a little bit crazy, being like, why am I doing this? You know, you're examining yourself, you're examining your feelings and your body, all of that. But the more that you do it, the better at it you become, and the more powerful you become, because you're operating without the fat. You're operating without the robotic stuff, which is you being who you truly are, which is the embodiment of the I. Okay. This is from Recycling Gestapo. Uh-oh, that sounds dangerous. Okay. Will a plasma ball attract dodgy entities into your home? Oh, so sometimes in certain psychic development circles, there's the idea of like, it's very common. So one of the things that's popular in psychic development, and it has been for quite a long time, is you basically learn how to feel energy by building a ball in your hand, and that's how you learn how to feel energy, and then you can basically build it up, and you're sort of, through your focus and your own body energy and energy that will circulate just by bringing focus there, you build up a ball, a chi ball or a plasma ball. And I mean, I don't think that when it comes to like entities coming in, I mean, if you build a chi ball with your hands, I don't think that is not like a summoning ritual. I mean, there are things that, you know, people do all the time that, you know, summon these things from the gates of dark places and stuff like that. Or, you know, there's also people who call in higher entities and things like that. I don't think that building a plasma ball will do that, to my knowledge. You'd have to set an intention for that. You know, you have to set an intention for everything that you do spiritually. And you automatically, anytime you're doing anything spiritually, you call in Christ, you call in, you know, angels and things like that. So you're always working within a certain safe paradigm. Okay. Okay, we're going to do 2 more questions. Wolf has been up absolutely for a few days straight, I think like 48 hours. So he's got to get up and move his legs and all of that as we're working on the site. Okay, so, all right, we'll do 2 more questions, okay? So this one is from a member, and it is: retaining and remembering our development seem like an uphill task. How might we remember our spiritual work in our next lives so that we can minimize possibilities of regression in our incarnations? Few people even remember their past life, let alone the lessons we learned previously. This feels daunting. Yes. Okay. So, you know, when you incarnate again, you will have within your being all of the information from all of your different lives. And then as you progress, you kind of go through like a microcosm of all of your other lives in this life. So when you get to a certain age in which you had a certain initiation or a spiritual experience that was very pivotal, you had an achievement, when you get to that age again in this life, you'll get that again, and then you'll get it even to a higher level potentiality. The same thing sometimes with darker experiences. So our life in this life is really a repetition in many ways of other lives. They're not the same, but there's certain archetypal experiences, dark and light, that we face. This is called karma in the Indian tradition. And so we don't have to do anything to like, make sure that these impulses reach us, or that they're stored in our spiritual body. They're there. It's part of our existence. It's part of what a soul is. It's part of what our astral sheath is. It's part of what our spiritual bodies are. It's part of our life. And the best thing that you can do to minimize, any kind of regression in a future life is to live this life with as much love as possible, to live a life of service, to live with Christ in your heart, in acknowledgement of that force, that, in acknowledgement of, knowing yourself. These are all things that create lucidity, actually. It really does come down to just living well and living honestly and living a virtuous life, right? And that is what creates that lucidity in the next life, where you're clearer, your abilities are carried over. It's about being, living a pure life in this life. That's what it's about. And not giving into every single lower urge you have, and transforming your dark to light, healing your trauma. This all creates a purification in this life, so that your next life you can, take on even greater heights, and become even more lucid spiritually. We're not, a lot of the time, necessarily as lucid as we want to be when it comes to past lives and spiritual things. Part of that is just the collective consciousness, or the kind of way the human being is now. We're just at a point where we're becoming spiritually conscious. And so in the future, human beings are going to eventually be able to incarnate and remember all of their past lives. We're just at a point where we're really becoming conscious and spiritual, especially in a way where we can see Christ within ourselves. We had a kind of consciousness in Atlantis and Lemuria, but it wasn't the same. And so now, again, it's turned inward, and we're now spiritualizing ourselves. And as this happens, we become more lucid in future lives. And so this is why you'll see, like in theosophy and anthroposophy, and even in other traditions, you see that there's something that was called, the sixth root race, or the sixth incarnation of humanity, which is a psychic humanity. That's how these different teachers have taught it, is that humanity becomes more psychic as the earth goes on, because we essentially integrate and build up that awareness, or it returns to us as an individual. Whereas before, we had spiritual abilities, but it was more like in a group in the Lemurian and Atlantean age. So now moving forward, we're individuals, and we get those abilities back through, but we're completely individualized. And that's where a lot of people get confused and think that humans are gods or something like that. It's really not about that. But we do have, humanity will develop in future incarnations of the planet and of the human being very powerful abilities if we can stay on the track of love and service. And that's when those abilities come on. That's when they become powerful. That's when we can remember, is you have to live a spiritual life. You can't live a life of indulgence and crime and selfishness and being a robot, like we talked earlier, and then expect, like, in your next incarnation that, like, you're going to have this incredible life. Like, that's just not how it works. I know a lot of people don't want to face that, but that's, either we're here to evolve or we're not. And so, there's been many different individuals and traditions that have come forward and taught different ways to live so that we can grow and evolve. The 7 virtues in esoteric Christianity is a good one. The 7 great virtues. That's a good way to live. And that will help to prepare you and purify you to become lucid in future eras of development. Okay, last question goes to Owen Lucas. Hey, Owen. And you said, should dark entities veiled in human form be prosecuted as such from a crime and punishment perspective? Okay, so we were just talking about the I. So if somebody is not developed as an individuality, as a soul, they're technically an empty vessel. And so you do have people walking around that look human. They have a human form. They may smile. They may seem that way. But on a spiritual level, they're actually technically possessed. They actually have entities from the lower astral plane or the demonic realms that are actually living within their form and controlling their form. And so even at the top levels of government and things like that, it may sound crazy to people, but not everybody is connecting into the same force. Not everybody's operating from the same station. And so eventually humanity is going to have to confront that. Now, when we start getting into like creating laws that, you know, punish people with like entities, and that's getting kind of into Salem witch trial stuff, in which when you look at the Salem witch trials in particular, a lot of people were killed that literally were not witches. They were Puritans just like everybody else, but their neighbor hated them, wanted their land, or was jealous of them, and said they were a witch, and then they got stoned to death or drowned or whatever. And so, you know, we can't create laws on the books to punish people for alleged spiritual entities that live in them, right? Because who is going to preside over that? And it could just be completely and utterly misused. But what we do need to understand is actually a spiritual teaching, which is that this is the reality that we live in. The reason why there's so much dark stuff that goes on and people are, you know, becoming so selfish and you know, possessed and things like this is because humanity doesn't understand what they are. They don't understand their light and their power. And they also don't understand how the shadow world can operate through them. And so we're just walking around as these incredibly powerful human beings with like no idea the forces that are at play around us and through us. You know, human beings are just vessels. And the only way we can learn to control it is, again, through the development of our I, our individuality, and our soul. That way we get mastery or mastership. But if you're not working towards that, you can just become a vehicle of lower forces that work through your lower three chakra centers, which again is represented by the dragon, right? And Ahriman. You know, you got to get control or harmonize, and they can wreak havoc. And people don't even realize that this thought that they're having isn't their thought. It's like this intrusive thing that they'd never think of. It's like, yeah, that's a dark presence that's trying to operate through you. It has no form. It wants to operate through you, right? And so what we need now isn't necessarily laws that persecute people who are allegedly possessed, because we could be wrong, right? What we need spiritual education. We need people to actually understand how a human being operates. You know, we need spiritual science to take root so that every person can develop discernment and begin to sense whether someone's evil or not. I mean, look around. For the last few years, we've had an absolute predator class, absolute psychopathic, psychotic predators preying on humanity through different kinds of crises, through different kinds of things as they try to consolidate wealth and power in their direction. That's the reality. And so many people have no idea what's going on. They have no ability to sense evil, even though they are being predated upon badly. What's going on with that? Well, they're not able to sense evil within themselves. We were talking about the doppelganger and that dark force that is not pleasant, but it reveals to us who we are. When you can't recognize your shadow in yourself, the evil within yourself and your own potential to do evil to yourself or other people, or be cruel or be harmful, be mean, even if it's just being rude to someone. If you can't see that in yourself and you don't face your shadow, you don't face your darkness, you don't face your trauma, you will not see it in the world. You will not see the predators out there because you refuse to see it within your own self. And it's these individuals, and myself included, everyone included, we all do this. This is not, saying some people do and don't. We all struggle with this. But it's our own ignorance where we refuse to see our own shadow that allows us to be predated upon by external evils. So this is getting back into the power of Christian mysticism, which really gets into confronting dark and light. Look at Rudolf Steiner talking about the two different kinds of darkness in the human being and in the world, Lucifer and Ahriman. Look at that. That's a powerful teaching that lets us know very deeply the kind of shadows that walk amongst us and in ourselves. And we have to know what those essences are within us. What is the Ahrimanic essence? What is the Lucifer essence? What does it feel like when they come around, when it comes alive in us? Because we all have this within us. It's part of how we transcend it. We have to know what that feels like so we can face it, confront it, and transcend it or transubstantiate it. And when people can begin to do this in numbers, we will see crime rates go down. We will see more harmony on the planet. And our tolerance towards psychotic people running society will go down as well. But as long as we're just playing video games and not doing any kind of self-examination and scrolling on screens and not thinking a darn about what's going on inside of us, we will be predated upon in the world by the same darkness that is right now within us. That's how we face it. You can't legislate it. You cannot legislate, there's certain laws I think that can help on a very basic level, but the real change happens due to spiritual realization and transformation. That's when the world changes. You can do some things with laws, but it's very difficult to make spiritual laws. Those already exist. We have to understand how they work. But anyway, and also people who are taken by these dark entities, it is kind of like their own punishment. If there is anything there at all within these people, right? A lot of people are just really just empty vessels at this point. So yeah, that's it. You guys, thank you so much for joining me today. As always, it's been my absolute pleasure. If you have enjoyed this live Q&A, I want to remind you that I do this every other Sunday on my members platform. It's my private website. On that website, I have forums, and you can go much deeper into these topics with amazing mystics and people. There's so many amazing, there's such an amazing community on there of support, because you know what? It is hard to be a spiritual person in modern times. A lot of the times your family doesn't get you. Like, who are you supposed to talk about this stuff with? You have a spiritual experience. Who are you supposed to talk about it with? You don't understand. There are forums. We have a community where you can discuss this stuff. I take questions every 2 weeks, and I usually go for 3 to 4 hours just taking your questions. So you're not alone, okay? And so I will be lecturing also in the new year, which I'm looking forward to. And we are just, our server is just going through some maintenance right now. And y'all will be able to sign up for memberships and anything going on my website, usually probably within about 48 hours. I think that's pretty much it. Just yeah, I hope you guys have a phenomenal New Year's. Yeah, it was my absolute pleasure to connect. So I will see you guys probably in a few days with some content. And you guys enjoy your Sunday. All my love your way.